The morning sun cast long shadows across St. Peter's Square as Pope Leo XIV prepared for his usual Wednesday general audience. It was May 22, 2025, just 2 weeks since his historic election as the first American pope. The 69-year-old pontiff had maintained his humble routine, often walking through Rome's streets to connect with the faithful. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support is so important and helps us share more inspiring stories of faith. Your Holiness, the security team advises against unescorted walks. Cardinal. Secretary of State Pietro Parolin cautioned during their morning briefing. Leo XIV adjusted his white cassock and smiled. Peter, my friend, fear should never dictate how we serve God's people. Today, I visit Santa Maria in Trastevere. The parish requested a blessing for their new community center. What the Pope didn't know was that Italian authorities had received an anonymous tip claiming he was carrying classified Vatican documents illegally. Detective Marco Rossini of the Carabinieri studied the warrant in his hands, confused by its unusual nature but bound by duty to execute it. At 3:47 p.m., Pope Leo XIV emerged from Santa Maria in Trastevere, having spent 2 hours with parishioners. Children had gathered around him, laughing as he blessed their drawings and answered their innocent questions about America. The scene was peaceful, almost sacred. Suddenly, 3 unmarked cars surrounded the church entrance. Detective Rossini approached with visible reluctance, flanked by 6 officers. The crowd of faithful immediately sensed tension, phones appearing to record. The unprecedented moment. Your Holiness, Rossini began, his voice trembling slightly. I have a warrant for your search and temporary detention regarding suspected possession of classified state documents. The Pope stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back. The Italian grandmother who had just received his blessing gasped audibly. A young priest stepped forward protectively, but Leo XIV gently raised his hand, signaling him to stay calm. Detective, Pope Leo XIV said in perfect Italian, his Chicago accent barely detectable, I understand you're following orders. May I see the warrant, please? Rossini handed over the document, watching as the Pope read it carefully. The crowd grew larger, tourists and locals alike drawn by the commotion. Vatican Swiss guards, who had been discreetly following at a distance, moved closer, but remained non-threatening. This warrant mentions classified documents, the Pope observed aloud. The only documents I carry are my breviary, some pastoral letters, and... He paused, reaching into his cassock. This letter from a child in Peru asking me to pray for her sick grandmother. He handed the letter to Rossini, who read it with growing embarrassment. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their spiritual leader cooperated with an investigation that seemed increasingly absurd. Social media exploded as live streams began broadcasting the scene worldwide. As Detective Rossini examined the innocent correspondence, his superior, Commissioner Elena Martelli, arrived at the scene. She had been monitoring the situation from headquarters, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the international incident unfolding. Detective, what's the status? She asked, eyeing the growing crowd of journalists and faithful. Pope Leo XIV turned to her with a serene expression. Commissioner, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm happy to accompany you to clarify any concerns. However, I request that any search be conducted respectfully, considering the sacred nature of these items. The Pope gestured to his breviary and a small wooden cross he always carried. These were blessed by Pope Francis before his passing. They hold deep spiritual significance, not state secrets. Commissioner Martelli realized the gravity of the situation. Here was the leader of 4 billion Catholics, treating what appeared to be a malicious false accusation with dignity and grace. Your Holiness, we can conduct this investigation at the Vatican, Commissioner Martelli offered, trying to salvage the situation diplomatically. But Pope Leo XIV shook his head gently. "Commissioner, if you have a duty to perform, then perform it here, before these witnesses. I have nothing to hide from God's people." The crowd murmured in admiration. An elderly Roman woman shouted, "Questo è un santo," "This is a saint." Her words rippled through the gathering, and people began kneeling on the ancient cobblestones. Detective Rossini looked through the Pope's simple possessions, the breviary with handwritten notes from his Augustinian formation, letters from children around the world, a small bottle of holy water from the Jordan River, and his rosary beads worn smooth from decades of prayer. "Commissioner," Rossini whispered urgently, "there's nothing here. This appears to be a false report." As the search concluded with no evidence found, Pope Leo XIV asked for permission to address the crowd. Commissioner Martelli nodded, recognizing that the situation required careful handling to avoid an international incident. The Vatican's Swiss guards maintained their respectful distance, their colorful uniforms a stark contrast to the grey Carabinieri uniforms. The Pope stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the square without amplification. "My dear friends, what you have witnessed today is not an injustice, but an opportunity. These officers were doing their sworn duty, protecting the security of your nation. Just as Christ submitted to earthly authority, we too must respect the rule of law." The crowd listened intently as he continued, many recording on their phones. "In Peru, where I served for many years among communities forgotten by their government, I learned that true leadership means accepting scrutiny with grace. The Church must always be transparent, always open to accountability. We cannot demand trust from the world if we are not willing to be examined by it." An elderly priest from the parish stepped forward. "Santo Padre, this is unprecedented. No pope has ever been searched like a common criminal." Leo XIV smiled gently. "Father Giuseppe, and no pope before me was born in Chicago either. God writes, straight with crooked lines, as we say. Perhaps this moment will teach us all something about humility and service." A journalist from CNN International shouted a question. "Your Holiness, will you file charges against whoever made the false accusation? Will there be diplomatic consequences?" The Pope's response would shock the world and define his early pontificate in ways no one could have predicted. Pope Leo XIV paused thoughtfully before responding to the journalist's question. The silence stretched across the piazza as hundreds held their breath, waiting for what many expected to be a condemnation of the false accusation. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the ancient church facade, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere around the unprecedented scene. "File charges," the Pope repeated, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face. "My friend, whoever made this report may have acted from fear or misunderstanding. In my years as a missionary in Lima's poorest neighborhoods, I learned that people often lash out when they feel threatened or confused. Jesus himself was accused falsely, searched by soldiers, questioned by authorities, and found innocent. Should I, a mere servant, claim to be above my Lord and Master?" The crowd stirred, surprised by his unexpected response. Commissioner Martelli watched in amazement as this man, who had every right to be outraged and could cause a major diplomatic incident, chose instead the path of radical forgiveness. Detective Rossini found himself fighting back tears, remembering his own Catholic upbringing. "I invite whoever reported this to come forward, not for punishment, but for dialogue," the Pope continued, his voice growing stronger. "Perhaps they were concerned about something they saw or heard. Fear often drives people to act in ways they later regret. I've done it myself many times. When I was young and proud, I too made accusations based on incomplete understanding." A Roman woman in the crowd called out, "Santo Padre, you are too good for this world." Her voice cracked with emotion, and others began to murmur agreement. The Pope raised his hand gently. "No, dear sister, I am simply trying to follow the example set for us. This incident, strange as it may seem, gives us a chance to practice what we preach about mercy and reconciliation." As news of the Pope's response spread through social media, the Vatican's communications office scrambled to manage the unprecedented situation. Within minutes, Shaka Pope arrest and forgiveness first were trending worldwide. Cardinal Luis Ladaria, prefect of the doctrine of the faith, called an emergency meeting of the papal communications team. "Holy Father," he said via secure phone from the Apostolic Palace, "the international press is calling this incident everything from papal persecution to the humility of a saint. CNN is running it as breaking news. Al Jazeera is analyzing the diplomatic implications, and the BBC is calling it the most extraordinary papal moment in modern history. How should we respond officially?" Pope Leo XIV, now safely back in his modest apartment at the Domus Sanctae Marthae, where he had chosen to remain despite protocols suggesting the Apostolic Palace, considered carefully while sipping the simple tea he preferred over coffee. "Luis, we respond with truth and complete transparency. Release a statement that I cooperated fully with Italian authorities, that no wrongdoing was found, and that I bear no ill will toward anyone involved in this investigation." But the Pope had already decided on a more dramatic gesture that would further shock the Catholic world and his advisors. He turned to his personal secretary, Monsignor James Mackenzie, an Irish-American priest who had served with him in Peru. "James, tomorrow morning I want to visit the Carabinieri station where Detective Rossini works. We'll bring coffee and pastries for the entire unit, the good ones from that bakery near the Pantheon that the Swiss guards love." Mackenzie nearly dropped his notepad. "Holy Father, the security implications alone will be manageable." The Pope interrupted gently. "This gesture will symbolize forgiveness and bridge building in a world that desperately needs both. We cannot preach reconciliation from ivory towers, James. Sometimes we must walk among those who question us, even search us, and show them Christ's love through our actions." The following morning, Detective Rossini nearly choked on his espresso when his sergeant announced that the Pope had arrived at their station with breakfast for everyone. Word spread quickly through the building, and officers from different departments began gathering in the main hall, still in disbelief. Commissioner Martelli rushed downstairs, still adjusting her uniform, to find Pope Leo XIV chatting with desk sergeants about their families, asking about their children's schools and their parents' health. He was completely at ease, as if visiting police stations was part of his regular routine. "Your Holiness, this is completely unexpected," she stammered, still processing the surreal sight of the world's most powerful religious leader distributing cornetti and espresso in their modest precinct. "Commissioner, yesterday your officers protected their country with professionalism and respect," the Pope replied, handing her a warm cornetto. "Today, I want to thank them personally and show that there are no hard feelings. Unity builds stronger communities than division ever could." Detective Rossini approached nervously, his hands trembling slightly. Several of his colleagues watched from a respectful distance, phones discreetly recording this historic moment. "Holy Father, I must apologize for the way—" "Marco," the Pope interrupted, placing a gentle hand on the detective's shoulder and, using his first name, "You did your duty with respect and dignity. You treated me fairly, followed protocol, and conducted yourself with honor. That's all any of us can do in difficult situations. Your mother should be proud of the man she raised." Rossini's eyes filled with tears. "How did you know about my mother, Holy Father?" "A good detective isn't the only one who notices details." Leo XIV smiled. pointing to a small family photo on Rossini's desk, visible through the open office door. As news crews gathered outside, prevented from entering by security, but able to capture images through the windows, the scene of the Pope sharing breakfast with the police who had searched him the day before became instantly iconic worldwide. 3 days later, the identity of the anonymous tipster emerged through investigative journalism by Vatican correspondent Andrea Tornielli. It was revealed to be Father Alessandro Torretti, a 45-year-old conservative Vatican official in the Secretariat of State, who opposed Pope Leo XIV's planned reforms and harbored resentment about an American ascending to the papacy. Instead of feeling vindicated or angry, Pope Leo XIV felt only deep compassion. He personally called Father Torretti that evening, requesting a private meeting. When they met in the papal library the following day, surrounded by centuries of church wisdom, the younger priest expected severe consequences, perhaps exile to a remote monastery or laicization. "Alessandro," the Pope began gently, settling into a simple wooden chair rather than the ornate papal throne. "I understand your concerns about change in the Church. I've read your theological writings. They show genuine passion for tradition and doctrine. Perhaps we can discuss your fears openly as brothers in Christ." Father Torretti broke down completely, confessing through tears his deep anxieties about losing traditional Latin Mass, his fears that American influence would secularize the Church, and his personal struggle with feeling overlooked for promotions. The Pope listened for 2 full hours without interruption, occasionally nodding with understanding. "Alessandro, your love for the Church is evident, but fear has clouded your judgment," Leo XIV said finally. "I'm not assigning you punishment, but rather a new mission. I'm placing you in charge of our new interfaith dialogue initiative with Eastern Orthodox churches. Your deep knowledge of patristic theology makes you perfect for this role. Channel your passion constructively, help build bridges instead of walls." The arrest incident became the defining moment of Leo XIV's early papacy, demonstrating that true papal authority lies not in retaliation or power, but in the radical transformation of enemies into allies through the revolutionary power of Christ-like forgiveness and understanding. 6 months later, Father Torretti would become one of the Pope's most trusted advisors, and Detective Rossini would convert back to active Catholic practice after years of spiritual drift, directly inspired by witnessing authentic Christian leadership in action. What did you think of Pope Leo XIV's incredible response? Would you have reacted the same way in his situation? This real story shows us that true leadership isn't about power, but about transforming hearts through forgiveness. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of grace today.